The kritzkrieg is the perfect complement to the stock medigun. It functions almost identically, healing and overhealing exactly the same as stock. The only difference is that the kritzkrieg charges its uber 25% faster, and of course, the uber itself is different. Instead of 8 seconds of invulnerability on both the medic and his patients, a kritzkrieg ubercharge gives the patient 8 seconds of crits. There are plenty of guides on YouTube focused on the medic perspective of the kritzkrieg, but today I want to talk about the patient. That being said, medic players watching this can probably benefit from some of this advice as well. Alright, before I can get to the meat of the video, I need to give an obligatory disclaimer. The stock medigun is superior to its alternatives, the kritzkrieg included. Equipping the kritzkrieg is a bit of a faustian bargain. There is no denying the allure of the kritzkrieg. Who doesn't want 3 times damage and no damage fall off? But it's not as good as stock to run full time. That isn't to say it doesn't have its uses, and I am certainly not saying it's not a fun item. I love the kritzkrieg, but the point I'm trying to make is that you wouldn't use a bone saw when a scalpel would do. Actually, the medic would, but I'm getting off topic. The kritz is the right tool for the job in a few scenarios. Firstly, if you have 1 or more competent players who are playing a class that is very good to crits. Here is my theoretical tier list of the strongest crits targets. Now, if you have like 3 demos, that doesn't mean you should go back to spawn to swap the crits, because team composition is not the only variable. The kritz is also strong against teams that don't have any uber, or strong against an uber medic who hasn't yet charged his uber charge. If you take a kritz into an uber, unless the other medic messes up and drops his uber, you are probably going to lose because invincibility beats extra damage. I would say that the kritzkrieg really shines against teams that are just worse than you. To be honest, most of the time I prefer uber because I don't really need extra damage to get kills, but staying alive can be difficult. But if I have a kritz medic and the other team is lacking competent combat classes, it will be a slaughterfest. Against stronger teams, ubercharge changes from nice to have to basically essential because breaking through choke points without invulnerability is basically impossible. Also, more experienced players will be able to exploit the kritz's biggest weakness, its complete lack of defense. If you just kill a kritz medic and or his heal target, you don't really need to worry about kiting. So in summary, the kritz can be situationally strong, but sometimes the best decision a kritz medic can make is to switch to the default medigun. A kritz uber won't help you push barn blitz last or bust through a choke point on Dust Bowl. You need uber. It's the strongest thing in the game. Alright, now that I have given my disclaimer, what do you do when you get kritzed? Well, like I find myself saying so often on this channel, it depends. Obviously, the defining feature of the kritzkrieg is the triple damage with no damage fall off, so shooting the enemies is a good bet. However, you are not invincible, so you need to proceed with caution. I'm going to break this up by class and give the best practices that I have found. Before I get to the specifics, here are a few general tips. Firstly, if you have a medic who you can communicate with, or who is waiting for your call to use the kritz, try to have all of your ammo loaded up before popping. If you are playing medic, please don't wait to use until your pocket has already used all their ammo. Please. You can see it on your HUD. I think this part is relatively obvious, but I should mention that killing a medic with your kritz uber is usually the goal, especially if they are running stock uber. If they are running quick fix, then you are contractually obligated to kill them so that they will learn that quick fix sucks. And if they are on vaccinator, God help you. One thing I can't stress enough is to abuse the range advantage kritz gives you. Damage falloff does not apply, so if you are fighting classes that do suffer from falloff, it is likely in your best interest to keep your distance. That being said, just because you outrange your opponents doesn't mean you shouldn't ever get aggressive. Even if you are on the defending team, I find that sitting around waiting for the perfect moment to kritz is foolish. Getting aggressive with kritz is fantastic because you can catch enemies off guard in places where they can't easily kite. Furthermore, pubbers love to group up in areas where they are staging a push. I'm not sure why, but I think players are conditioned to believe that certain parts of the map are inherently safe. Combine this with an AoE class and you get big booming hit sounds and an unparalleled rush of dopamine. You just have to be smart with your aggression. Don't pop a kritz into a level 3 sentry nest, or if you do, play the corner and kill the engineer with the kritz so you can spam out the gun and turn the teleporter into scrap. Speaking of teleporters, if you are defending, an enemy teleporter is a great reason to push up from where you are, and the kritz is effective at doing this. Keeping a teleporter dead on payload is key to winning as the red team. Alright, moving on to class-specific advice. Let's start at the top of the tier list I showed earlier and go down. As a Demoman, you are a prime kritzkrieg target, at least if you are running pipes and stickies. Demo Knight can go in the D for don't tier. There are a number of reasons that Demo is the absolute strongest kritz target. Firstly, his projectiles will one-shot the vast majority of classes, which is kind of the whole point of a kritz uber. Secondly, he has a ton of projectiles if he's fully loaded, so a well-timed Demo kritz can literally clear out a server. Also, I probably don't need to explain that area of effect is really good when kritz boosted. Lastly, Demo is one of the best classes at leveraging the lack of damage falloff. When you are being kritzed, charging your stickies to snipe far away targets is incredibly effective. Normal sticky sniping is only situationally good because your sticky bombs will only deal 30 to 50 damage, but when kritz boosted, this number becomes 200 to 300. Since landing any damage will usually be a one-shot, the main difficulty in getting kritzed as a Demo isn't getting kills, but rather staying alive for long enough to get the most out of the kritz. For that reason, good target priority is key. Ideally, you will charge a sticky before your medic pops so that you can outsnipe any snipers that could ruin your uber from across the map. However, if the other team has no snipers or they just aren't very good, you can risk focusing the players closer to you first. Outside of sniper, your main threats will usually be the closest players to you, so just shoot whatever moves. Lastly, you should prioritize using your stickies over pipes. Other than being easier to aim, you also can't get yourself or your team killed by shooting one at an enemy Pyro. Next up is Soldier, who I would argue is noticeably worse than Demo for getting crits, but still an extremely powerful class. Obviously, AoE crit rockets are powerful, and while Soldier isn't as good at sniping targets at long ranges, it is definitely still possible. Similar to Demoman, you should focus the targets that are the biggest threat to you and your medic, and try to avoid giving Pyros a free rocket to reflect. Unless you are running a shotgun, you have less server clearing potential than a Demo, and you need to be careful because a fully buffed heavy can actually pretty easily kill you before you can fire off a second rocket, so you will still want to use corners to your advantage if you know there are healthy heavies. That being said, a Soldier crits into a battalion's backup in the post is crazy strong. Actually, using a battalion's backup while you are being kritzed is even better because you are mitigating the biggest weakness of a kritz uber. You are very vulnerable to getting sniped or cheesed by another high damage per second class, or god forbid, random crits. The other banners, the buff and the conch, are just not worth rocking when you have a kritz medic on your team because they are redundant and you don't have the aforementioned synergy. Next on my list is Heavy, who does not have splash damage. However, because crits ignore damage falloff, and because Heavy doesn't have to reload, he is a fantastic target. The main problem with using stock uber on Heavy is that the other team can just run away, but the kritzkrieg actually sort of makes up for this because it reduces Heavy's time to kill, and of course increases his effective range. That being said, all it takes to not die to Heavy is to break line of sight, and this is still the case with the crits. That is why, if I am expecting to get a kritz uber, I will try to corner peek into the other team so that they won't have time to react and just run away to cover. The problem with this is obviously that you are not invincible, and this strategy can and will result in you getting sniped, dying to a sticky trap, or just being bursted down really quickly. Like I made very clear at the start of this video, the crits is just objectively worse than uber, so sometimes it just doesn't work out. One thing that I usually forget to mention is that the Holiday Punch can deny enemy ubers, and while an uber will usually beat out a crits, if you can manage to melee the heal target while crits, you are guaranteed to make them laugh. Is this a good strategy to use if you know the other team is on uber? No, your medic should just switch to stock. However, if you have a med hell-bent on running crits, it may be worth it to switch to the Holiday Punch in case this ever comes up. Scout is a bit low on this list, and if it were a tier list for stock uber, he would be in second after Demo. However, while Scout is still a very good crits target, the main reason he is so low is because he is less survivable than the previously mentioned classes. Obviously, a good Scout is good at dodging, but when you are popping to crits, ideally you want there to be a lot of enemy players to shoot at so that you can get the maximum value out of the crits. But Scout can only dodge so much, and due to his low health, it can be hard to stay alive in my experience. Maybe this is just because I am bad at Scout, but I think I am right despite that. Stock Uber works so well on Scout because it completely eliminates his only weakness, low health. Another, less obvious but still relevant reason why Scout is not as good of a target as Demo, Soldier, and Heavy is because the 3 times damage is applied to a weapon's base damage. So while rockets and pipes do 270 and 300 damage respectively, Scattergun will only deal 180 damage if you hit every single pellet. Theory aside, taking a crits as Scout is pretty straightforward. Just shoot the biggest threat until they are dead, and then repeat. Just try not to blunder into taking a ton of damage like I usually do. Okay, next on my list is Pyro, and I would say this is the inflection point where your medic is no longer making a smart choice kritzing you based on the class you are playing, at least in a vacuum. Anyways, kritzing a Pyro is usually a bad idea just because of Pyro's inability to deal damage with their primary at anything but very close quarters. Can a Pyro crits be fat? Absolutely. It is just less effective than a demo crits because so much more can go wrong. I think that getting crits as a Pyro needs no explanation. WM1 and hope there are no sentries or heavies waiting for you. If you get lucky, it will be a barbecue. Engineer is basically just a worse scout when it comes to the kritzkrieg, assuming he is running a shotgun, so just see the scout section. The only way that Engineer is arguably a better crits target than Scout is if he has the Widowmaker, but if you are running that item, you probably have a friend kritzing you, so at that point you would be better off just playing Demo, but whatever. If the Enchi is running Rescue Ranger, then he belongs at the very bottom of the tier list with Medic. Sniper and Spy are both pretty bad crits targets, and there isn't much for me to say about them, so I am lumping them into the same category. Sniper is probably better than Spy for crits, but this is just because he can do 150 damage with the body shot and quickly swap to the SMG if he has one equipped. If the Sniper doesn't have an SMG, then maybe Spy is better, but they both don't have very much health, and the only reason you would be getting crits if you are playing either class is if your medic is desperate. Either way, it's hit scan, so it's pretty self-explanatory. Just shoot the other team. Lastly, we have Medic. Again, there isn't anything to say here. You are probably better off just spamming crossbow bolts across the map. I wouldn't recommend trying to go for melees for obvious reasons. Anyways, that is all I have to say regarding the kritzkrieg. Thank you for watching. Just need to kill the cart. There's absolutely no way that I got away with that, man. That's crazy.